The morning sun rose over the small western town, painting the dust roads with gold light. The fairground was already full of noise. Men shouted prices, horses neighed, and the smell of hay and sweat mixed in the air. Cowboys came from miles away to buy or sell. It was one of those days when money, luck, and fate all met at once. Among them came Luke Carson, a quiet cowboy from a ranch near the hills. He was not a man who talked much. People knew him for his calm eyes and honest work. He had come that day with only one goal: to buy a strong horse for his ranch. His old horse had grown weak after years of hard riding. He wanted one that could help him on the rough land. He walked through the crowd slowly, studying the horses being shown. There were thin mules, tired mares, and a few good ones that cost too much. He waited, leaning near the fence, hands in his pockets, hat low on his forehead. Luke had the patience of a man who had seen both good days and hard ones. Then came a sudden shout that made everyone turn. "The wild horse!" Someone shouted, "Clear the space." Men stepped back, creating an open ring as a group of handlers pulled a dark stallion inside. The animal was strong and large, its coat black like storm clouds. Ropes cut into its sides as it reared up, snorting and kicking wildly. The men holding it cursed and struggled to control it. The horse's eyes flashed with fear and anger. It had been caught in the wild a few months ago, and since then it had broken more than one man's arm. The traders had starved it, whipped it, and tried to break its spirit, but it only grew wilder. People in the crowd laughed and shouted, "That beast can't be tamed." One man yelled. Another added, "It's cursed. Whoever rides it won't live long." Luke didn't laugh. He stepped closer, watching the horse carefully. Beneath the wildness, he saw something else: pain. The animal wasn't just dangerous. It was scared, beaten, misunderstood. The trader in charge shouted, "Who'll take the risk?" $10 for the wild one. "Cheap, but you might lose your head trying to ride it." No one answered. Everyone wanted to see the show, not buy trouble. Then Luke spoke quietly. "I'll take him." The trader turned, surprised. "You sure about that, cowboy? He's thrown every man who tried to ride him." Luke nodded and pulled out the money. "I'll handle him my way." The crowd began whispering. "Fool," someone laughed. "He'll regret it before sundown." But Luke didn't care. He stepped toward the stallion slowly, his boots sinking in the dust. The horse snorted and tried to rear again. But Luke's calm voice stopped it. He didn't shout or pull the reins hard. Instead, he spoke softly, steady as a river. The animal blinked, its ears twitching, trying to understand. After a long minute, the horse stopped struggling. Everyone watching fell silent. Luke reached out gently and touched the rope. The stallion didn't move. It stood still, trembling but quiet. He led it out of the ring carefully, one step at a time. The trader stared in disbelief. "Well, I'll be. No one ever made that thing stand still before." As Luke prepared to leave, another voice came from the back. "Wait, you can't take that horse without the girl." Luke turned, frowning. "What girl?" The trader scratched his neck and looked uncomfortable. "The one that came with it. The last rancher owned both, the horse and the girl. Said she was to care for the animal. When he died, they got sold together. No one wants her, so she stays with the horse. Part of the deal." The crowd turned to look. From the corner of the pen stepped a thin young woman. Her clothes were dusty and torn, her hands covered with rope burns. Her dark hair hung loose, hiding part of her face. She stood quietly, holding an old halter, eyes down. For a long second, no one spoke. The trader finally said, "You buy the horse, you take her too." Luke's brow furrowed. "That's not right. She's not property." The trader shrugged. "I don't make the rules. $5 and you can take her off my hands. Nobody here wants a servant with a bad past." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some laughed, others shook their heads. To them, it was just business. Luke looked at the girl again. She wasn't begging or crying. She just stood still, waiting. Her eyes, when they finally lifted to meet his, were calm but tired, like someone who had already stopped hoping. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, without another word, he reached into his coat and handed the trader $5. "You're serious?" the trader said. Luke nodded once. "Just give me the papers," the trader grinned. "Suit yourself, cowboy. You just bought yourself a wild horse and a useless girl." People laughed as Luke walked away, leading the stallion and motioning the girl to follow. He didn't speak, and neither did she. Behind them, the crowd's laughter faded into the wind. Outside the fairground, the road stretched long and empty across the hills. Luke helped her climb onto his wagon. The horse followed beside them, still restless but no longer fighting. After a while, he said quietly, You don't have to be afraid. You're free now. The girl blinked at him. Free? Her voice was soft, almost unsure of the word. He nodded. I paid for you so those men wouldn't keep you. You can go wherever you want. She looked back at the dusty town, then forward to the open road. Her hands shook slightly as she whispered, I have nowhere to go. Luke thought for a moment. Then you can stay at my ranch. Just until you decide. It's quiet there. No one will bother you. She lowered her head. Why would you do that? He shrugged. Because someone should. They rode on in silence as the sun began to fall behind the hills. When night came, they stopped near a river. Luke built a small fire while the girl fetched water. The wild stallion stood nearby, watching them both. Every time Luke moved, the horse's ears twitched as if still learning whether to trust him. When they ate a little bread and dried meat, Luke noticed the girl barely touched hers. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated. Mara, she whispered finally. Mara, he repeated softly as if testing the sound. I'm Luke. She nodded, eyes on the firelight. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was quiet in a peaceful way, like two strangers sharing the same wound of the past. Later, when the fire turned to embers, Luke lay awake looking at the stars. He thought about the wild horse tied nearby, about the girl sleeping not far away, and about how strange fate could be. He had come to town for a horse, yet somehow he had walked away with two souls, one broken by fear and one still trying to find freedom. And though he didn't know it yet, both would change his life forever. The next morning came with a soft orange light spilling over the hills. The sound of birds mixed with the rush of the river nearby. Luke woke early as he always did and found Mara already awake. She was kneeling beside the wild horse, talking softly to it as she brushed its coat with slow, gentle strokes. The horse stood still, calmer than before. He watched for a moment without saying anything. There was something peaceful in the way she moved. Even the wild animal that had scared everyone seemed to listen to her voice. When she noticed him watching, she quickly stood up, lowering her head. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I thought he might be hungry. Luke shook his head. You did right. He trusts you. She looked surprised. No one ever said that before. He smiled slightly. Maybe they never looked close enough. After breakfast, they started the journey back to his ranch. The wild stallion walked beside them, no longer fighting the rope. Luke rode his old horse while Mara sat in the wagon. She looked around at the endless plains and tall mountains in the distance. How far is your ranch? She asked softly. About 20 miles, he said. By nightfall, we'll be there. They didn't talk much after that, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It felt calm, like the air before rain. Once in a while, Luke looked back to make sure she was fine. Every time their eyes met, she looked away quickly, unused to kindness. By evening, they reached a small valley. A wooden fence stretched across the land, and a small cabin stood near a barn. The fields were open and golden under the fading light. It wasn't a rich man's ranch, but it looked warm and alive. Luke helped her down from the wagon. This is home, he said simply. She looked around slowly. The smell of hay, the sound of cattle, and the distant call of birds filled the air. She hadn't seen a place like this in years. Inside the cabin, Luke showed her a small room beside the kitchen. You can stay here, he said. It's not much, but it's yours. No one will bother you. Mara stood still, touching the wooden wall as if she couldn't believe it was real. Thank you, she whispered. For the first time she smiled, small but genuine. The days passed quietly after that. Mara worked around the ranch, helping with the horses, cleaning, cooking, and caring for the animals. She moved carefully, as if afraid to make mistakes, but Luke never raised his voice or hurried her. He treated her with the same calm respect he gave to every creature around him. The wild stallion, whom he named Storm, slowly began to change too. He no longer tried to break free. When Mara approached, he lowered his head. When Luke rode nearby, he followed. It was as if both man and woman had given the horse something it had never known before. Trust. One afternoon, while Luke was fixing the fence, he saw Mara leading Storm through the open field. She was talking softly, and the horse trotted beside her like a friend. The sunlight shone on her hair, and for a moment Luke just stood there watching. He realized he hadn't seen her afraid in days. That night, as they ate by the fire, he said, "You're good with that horse. Better than most men I've known." She smiled faintly. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be trapped." He looked at her quietly. "You're not trapped anymore." She nodded slowly. "I know, but sometimes freedom feels strange. Like I'm still waiting for someone to take it away." Luke's voice was gentle. "No one here will do that. You have my word." Her eyes softened, and for a long time they both sat in silence listening to the crackle of the fire. As weeks turned into months, their lives settled into a rhythm. Luke taught her how to ride. At first she was scared, but he was patient. He showed her how to hold the reins, how to breathe with the horse, how to trust the rhythm. Soon she could ride Storm without fear, her laughter echoing across the valley. People in town began to talk. Some said Luke had gone mad, bringing home a girl he bought at the fair. Others said she was lucky. But Luke didn't care about the talk. He saw the changes, the peace in her eyes, the light in her smile, and the way the ranch finally felt alive again. One evening, a storm rolled over the valley. The wind howled, the horses cried, and thunder shook the ground. The barn door flew open and Storm panicked, pulling at his rope. Luke rushed out into the rain to calm him. Mara followed, her dress soaked, her hair whipping in the wind. Together they fought the storm. She held the lantern while Luke steadied the horse. The rain poured down their faces, but they didn't stop until the animal was safe again. When it was finally quiet, they stood close under the flickering light, breathing hard. Mara looked up at him, her eyes bright with gratitude and something more she couldn't name. "You saved him again," she said softly. Luke shook his head. "We did." For a moment neither spoke. The thunder faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of rain on the roof. The next morning, sunlight poured through the clouds. The world smelled fresh and clean. Storm stood calm, eating hay like nothing had happened. Mara smiled as she brushed his mane. When Luke came out of the barn, she looked at him shyly. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe Storm isn't the only one who found a home here." Luke paused, watching her face. There was warmth in his eyes when he answered, "I was thinking the same." They stood there for a moment, the air between them soft and peaceful. Time passed, and the story of the cowboy and the girl spread quietly through nearby towns. Some said it was strange, others said it was fate. But on that small ranch in the hills, it didn't matter what people thought. Mara grew stronger each day. She laughed more, sang while she worked, and sometimes rode Storm across the open land, her hair flying like the wind. Luke watched her with quiet pride, knowing she had come back to life. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Mara stood beside him at the fence. The sky burned with colors, orange, red, and gold. She said softly, "When you bought me that day, I thought my life was over, but you gave me back something I never had before." "What's that?" he asked. "Hope," she said. He looked at her, then at the horse grazing nearby. "Maybe we both found it," he replied. As the last light faded, the wild stallion raised his head and neighed loudly, as if calling to the wind. It echoed through the valley, proud and free. Mara smiled and leaned on the fence beside Luke. The cowboy who came to buy a horse had ended up saving 2 souls that day. One wild, one lost. And together, they built a life that neither of them ever dreamed was possible. And from that day on, no one in the town ever called that horse Wild again. They just called him Storm, the horse who found peace with the cowboy and the girl who once had no name.